juicy question. You ready for it? What's your best advice on dealing with interpersonal conflict in the outside world? Ooh. So this is a huge question. And there's so much to the relational world and the complexities that go into it, and so many different types of conflict, different types of people, different things that could be happening at different times. It's very hard to generalize. It's a bit like if somebody put in the Q&A, how to meditate, right? It's like, well, it depends on a lot of things. So it's difficult to answer the question well without knowing a few more specifics of what's going on. But there's some general rules of thumb, I think, to dealing with conflict. The first one, I'll say, this is something I've had to learn a few times in my own life, is hold your standard for yourself. So when we are in interpersonal conflict, typically we're not at our best. But yet we should have some lines in ourselves that we're not going to cross. I hope, for example, a line that we wouldn't cross is none of us will resort to violence, for example. We might have a line which is I won't shout, I won't do name calling, I won't lie, things like that. Certain standards that, okay, I won't fall below this. My defilements might be aggravated, but I won't cross these lines. But there's a danger when we're in interpersonal conflict that we're in conflict with somebody who's fighting dirty and they are crossing all of those lines. And there's this saying that somebody gave to me when I was in a conflict situation with an unwise person. And the saying goes, don't argue with a fool, because they'll drag you down to their level and then they'll beat you with experience. And I learned the hard way that that's true, right? So when somebody's fighting dirty, it's really easy to be dragged down to their level and think, well, they're shouting, so I should shout back or something like that. So this is not a good strategy. We lose our self-respect, we go against our Hiryanatapa. Later we feel a lot of regret. And we're also going to lose the respect of the other person. So in an interpersonal conflict, we want to know where our hard lines are, what we're not going to cross, and we want to show up the best we possibly can, regardless of what the other person is doing. And if we notice through this sparring, through this conflict with the other person, that they are not able to reciprocate our standard, that tells us something about the kind of relationship that we want to have with them moving forwards, right? So we should not massively lower our standard for ourselves just to be able to fight with someone, okay? And it sounds silly, but this is a very, very easy mistake to make if ever any of you have been embroiled in some kind of unwise association. So the next sort of broad tip is we want to take enough space to remove as much of our defilements as possible before we engage in the dialogue. So if you know that someone's stirred up lots of defilements in you, or you've stirred up lots of defilements in them, then we want to take some space to establish our wise attention, to soothe our own emotion, to regulate ourselves, to bring ourselves back to some kind of wisdom. And if we're very dysregulated and we can't do that for ourselves, then we want to call in a wise friend who can help us come back to some kind of stability within ourselves, where we're reasonable, where we can see things clearly. If we're full up with difficult emotion, with lots of defilements, then we're going to say regrettable things. We're not going to accurately convey the truth of what's happened. And we're going to probably end up with a bigger mess than what we started with. So a good rule of thumb in a conflict is to take space until both people are relatively calm. Then when we actually start engaging, there wouldn't be a conflict if both people were perfectly established in wise attention and free from defilements. So we can expect defilements to be there, and we want to try and keep those to a minimum So there's some techniques that we can use to check that we are able to put down and abandon our own defilements for a little while. The most obvious one is listening, right? So if you are very much wrapped up in your own me and mine and your own point and what you want to say, you can't really be listening to somebody else. At the same time, if you are really listening to somebody else, then you have to, at least for a short time, put down all of your own agenda. So it's a good practice to listen sincerely to what the other person is trying to say, and if you're struggling, get in the practice of repeating it back to them. So what I think you're saying is this. If you want to go a step further, to hold your own standard in a conflict, it's a good practice to do what we call strong-manning the other person's argument, which means you give the strongest possible, most generous possible version of what they are trying to say back to them. So let's say they come to you and they say, well, I just think you are a goat face, or whatever. Why not? And all of our defilements want to say, I am not a goat face, my face doesn't look like a goat, I don't know what you're seeing. So rather than going into all of that me and mine and defense, instead we put ourselves in their world in the most generous way possible, and we say something like, oh, so when you look at me, what you see is a goat. Tell me more about that. Or something like that. And as we do that, it demands that we put our defilements down. And we enter into empathy and generosity and humility. And we might learn something. We might just expand our understanding a little bit, right? Now, obviously, the conflict will be much more easily resolved if the other person is reciprocating that. So if they're also listening to you, if they're also making a sincere attempt to be generous to you, and if they're not, then let that be your learning about the type of person you're in conflict with, right? Let that be your learning. So this is somebody who doesn't reciprocate these qualities that I am willing and able to embody. Then afterwards, when the conflict has passed, you know something about what role this relationship should play in your life, maybe how much trust or responsibility you should give that person, something like that. These are some rules of thumb, but there's so much that we could say about conflict. There's so many different types of conflict. There's so many different ways it can play out. There's so many different things that we can be fighting for or against, and why. So that's all I'll say for now. But if you've got more questions on conflict, maybe you can put the specifics in the Q&A vase for another night. Any follow-ups just on these general things? Yeah.
What about just walking away, if it's possible? Just
yeah.
At the first place?
Yeah, we can just walk away, especially in that initial stage where we just need to calm our defilements, for sure. We just need to settle ourselves emotionally, establish ourselves in wise attention. Sometimes walking away can be a really good strategy. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, is there something worth advocating for here? If there's not, and you're just willing to give up on that person, and then fine. No need to engage. But sometimes there's something worth advocating for, there's something worth dialoguing for. And then we need to have the strength of character to go back and dialogue and hash it out and try to understand, okay, where's my mistake, where's their mistake, where are we seeing things differently? Anything else?